Crucible of the Vampire, written by Amanda Murray, narrated by Gemma Lawrence. Chapter 5. Profanum. The following morning was raining. The sun had all but disappeared, and it felt like winter had returned. Isabelle had stationed herself at the large mahogany writing desk in the drawing room, where she'd first had tea with Carl and Evelyn. It was positioned in one of the large bay windows, and although a little draughty, she had a good view of outside the front of the house. The rain was sheeting so hard against the glass that it sounded like someone was hammering against the window. The fields outside were blurry, the colours melting into one another like a moody impressionist painting. Isabelle was just able to distinguish the rusty swing sheltering under the boughs of the huge old oak tree. She imagined pupils from the boarding school would have played under that tree and taken it in turns to use the swing. The gravel on the driveway had darkened with the rain, and somewhere she could hear a steady plonk-plonk of water dripping. Probably another leak somewhere in the house. Isabelle had her notes spread out in front of her. She was comparing some of the strange markings on the cauldron and trying to decipher their meanings. Many of the inscriptions were Brythonic, indicating that the cauldron probably originally dated from the 4th century. But her knowledge of Brythonic writings was patchy. It needed an expert to examine it properly. Frustratingly, she hadn't been able to get online to follow up on any of her research. There was no chance of any Wi-Fi in this place. She looked through the photographs she'd taken in the last few days. The cauldron was certainly proving to be an interesting object, and she was excited at the thought of getting it completely out of the ground. She was planning on giving Professor Edwards an update on progress and what she'd uncovered so far. There hadn't been any mobile reception in the house, even though she'd walked around the place trying to pick up a signal when she'd first arrived. I guess that's the disadvantage with living in the middle of nowhere, she thought. It was very inconvenient all the same, and now, rather annoyingly, she couldn't find her phone. Isabelle was planning on walking down to the phone box in the village to call the professor. Once the rain had stopped, of course. Isabelle's thoughts were interrupted by the creak of a door and soft footsteps. Scarlett sashayed in and perched herself provocatively on the edge of the desk. She was dressed in black leather trousers and a red chiffon blouse. A smile played on her cherry-red lips as she gazed intensely at Isabelle. She lazily twirled a strand of blonde hair between her fingers. "Do you like my perfume?" she asked Isabelle playfully. I'm sorry?" Isabelle was taken aback. She'd been lost in her work, and now Scarlett, who was normally aloof and unfriendly, was being really quite weird. "My perfume, do you like it?" Scarlett leaned forward and placed her wrist under Isabelle's nose and giggled coquettishly. Isabelle cleared her throat and tried to look relaxed. "Yes, it's nice." Scarlett was certainly acting a little strangely. She'd not seen her being so friendly. She wasn't sure how to react to her change of mood. She tried to get back to her work, bemused at Scarlett's behaviour. Out of the corner of her eye, she was aware of Scarlett's slim but firm thigh brushing against her arm. Scarlett remained on the edge of the desk for a few more moments, showing no signs of leaving or letting Isabelle get back to her work. She sat silently swinging her heel-clad foot. Isabelle couldn't concentrate on what she was doing, and she could feel Scarlett's penetrating gaze. Scarlett seemed pleased that she'd managed to disturb and distract Isabelle from whatever it was she was doing. All those dusty, boring notes were not in the slightest bit interesting. What was the point, anyway? Sighing, she got up to leave. As she did so, Isabelle suddenly remembered her missing mobile phone. "Scarlett, I don't suppose you've seen my phone, have you? I can't find it anywhere." Scarlett looked sheepish. Smiling coquettishly, she languidly replied, "No, I haven't." "Okay, if you see it, let me know." Isabelle tried to smile back. "Of course." And with that, she flounced out of the room, leaving Isabelle with her old books and notes. The day wore on, and Isabelle continued poring over the photographs, the strange symbols and lettering, trying to decipher what it all meant. The rain had eased off, but the dampness was still pervading the house. Isabelle set down her pen and notebook. A little weary of the task in hand, she ventured out into the hallway. The house was still, devoid of any noise. She wasn't sure whether Scarlett and her parents had gone out, or were otherwise occupied elsewhere in one of the hall's many rooms. Evelyn had mentioned to Isabelle when she'd first arrived that there were 54 rooms in the house. Isabelle had wondered why they needed so many rooms for a family of 3. She certainly wouldn't have wanted to live in such a vast, cold space. Isabelle walked towards the library, and remembering her conversation with Carl in the cellar, thought, "All right, let's have a look at the ramblings of St. Augustine." She began searching through the dusty bookshelves with their mishmash of books. Like many libraries, any genuinely old or valuable books had long since disappeared, sold most likely to raise funds for the hall's upkeep, and replaced with vintage finds and paperbacks. There was a whole series of crime novels and encyclopedias dating from the 1950s. There were quite a few china knickknacks gathering dust along the higher bookshelves. Suddenly, she spied what she was looking for. As she reached up to pull the book down, she noticed a narrow leather-bound notebook partially hidden by some papers. Her curiosity piqued. She took it off the shelf, abandoning St. Augustine's Confessions in favour of her new find. The notebook was quite old. She could tell that by the leather cover and paper inside, and that it was written with a quill. Isabelle settled herself on the window seat in the library, untied the cord, and began to read. After quickly examining the book, it became clear that it was some kind of journal, judging from the handwriting and dates entered inside. The owner was a Jeremiah Kane. There weren't that many entries. The first few talked about his move to the country after the death of his wife. He had rented Ashwell Hall for 3 months over one summer, when he had taken refuge from his sorrow and to indulge his love of music. Isabelle skimmed through the journal until she came to a much longer entry. Curious, she settled back into the window seat and, gripping the journal, she read in earnest. Having retired from a scholarly life in Oxford to the county of Salop, my custom of an afternoon was to take the airs and walk abroad, familiarising myself with my new surroundings. On one such excursion, I found myself on the fringes of Jacob's Wood, a particularly wild and ancient place, grown all the more so because local men fear to venture there. I have ascertained this is because there are some persistent rumours of witchcraft, which have led to this wood being shunned by all. In this age of reason, such beliefs seem to me ridiculous. As I walked along the tangled fringe of the wood, I fancied I heard curious music, faintly drifting on the wind. Intrigued, I stopped and listened. The thin, piping melody seemed to be emanating from the dark bowers of the wood, and being aware of the local reputation, my curiosity was pricked. I determined to find its source. I struck out into the wood, which, having been left abandoned and uncoppiced for many years, was dense and overgrown. My progress was slow and laboured, but as I picked my way through the dark boughs of the wood, I could catch the strange eldritch melody on the breeze. Eventually I came upon a small clearing, and as I stepped into it, the melody was no more. Just the sound of the wind in the trees remained. As I turned to leave, my foot struck an object protruding from the earth. I would not have remarked upon it, but for it made a singular metallic sound. Clearing away leaves and other detritus, I soon concluded I had stumbled upon something quite striking. I toiled to free the item from the earth, which held it in a vice-like grip. Having only my bare hands and sticks, such as I could find, it took me some time to lever the item free. It was nothing less than part of a cauldron. Returning to the house with my trophy, I set about scraping the soil and grime of centuries from it. The item was bronze and of ancient origin, covered with Brythonic writings. Over the next few weeks, I set about translating them as far as I was able. The cauldron was no household cooking pot, but a religious item, used in a ceremony of rebirth. The story revealed by the antiquated text was that of a dread queen slain in battle, who was placed in the cauldron along with the blood of her enemies. Through its magical power, she rose again. The name of this queen is lost, as at a later date, someone had been at pains to grind her name and likeness from the cauldron. In an act of further vandalism, the Latin word profanum, or unholy, had been etched into the sides of the vessel. Other words too, but as they crossed onto the missing portion, I was unable to decipher them. At the time, I took this to be the work of some dull mechanical, afraid of his own shadow, but as the days passed, I too began to fear. At first I was plagued by restless, fevered nights, and in that chimerical space between sleeping and waking, I often fancied I could hear that same melody as I had heard in Jacob's Wood, floating through the house. Several times I rose from my bed and searched the house in an effort to locate its source, always without success, until on one such night I left my bedchamber and walked the long gallery. Moonbeams streamed in through the windows, creating pools of unearthly light, around which, in the swimming grainy darkness, 1,000 fanciful fiends danced in my fevered imagination. I stopped, determined to put such thoughts from my mind. It was at that point the figure of a deathly pale woman appeared in front of me. I stared at her bleached, cavern-eyed face, etched with a hunger deeper than just a need for mere sustenance. Then, in an instant, she was gone. By morning, I was convinced my encounter with the awful woman was the product of a fevered mind, and attempted to put it from my thoughts. But several days later, I was at the piano, and without realizing it, I found myself playing the eldritch melody I first heard floating on the wind in the woods. As I looked up from the keys, I saw her again. So startled was I that I knocked the key lid down upon my hand and cried out. When I looked up, the apparition was gone. I know that I can no longer stay in this house. I am resolved to depart forthwith. I leave this account of the occurrences here, along with the musical notation of the melody that accompanies the spectre, as warning to those who come after me. God save us all. Jeremiah Kane, April 6th, 1807. As Isabelle reached the end of the journal, she turned to the last page and was startled to see a roughly drawn sketch of a ghost-like creature. It was of a pale and angry-looking girl with long flowing hair and large staring eyes. It bore a striking resemblance to the girl she'd seen on her first night in the house. Also tucked into the journal was a faded sheet of music. It was hand-drawn too. She opened it up, flattening the starched and creased document with her hand. Was this the music that Jeremiah Kane had been playing in 1807, when he'd inadvertently summoned the ghost girl? Isabelle suddenly had a thought. She pulled out the tourist leaflet from her notebook and studied the map intently. The area hadn't really changed much since Jeremiah's day, except for the addition of a few local homes and the village hall. The woods and ancient sites would have all existed in 1807. Jacob's Wood was situated between Baron's Cross to the north and Callowsfield to the south. Isabelle noticed a small waterfall, Longville Falls, and wondered whether this was where Jeremiah had dug up the missing half of the cauldron before bringing it back to the hall. She got out her pen and circled the section on the map. Perhaps it would be worth a walk over there to investigate, to see if it resembled the description in Jeremiah's journal. Isabelle folded up the sheet of music and slipped both that and the map into her notebook. She meandered back towards the cellar, musing on what she'd read. Thinking she'd work on the cauldron for another hour, but having second thoughts, she decided not to venture down into the cellar again, but headed upstairs towards her room. This time, she took the back staircase, which led directly off from the quarry tile passageway, originally used when the hall was full of servants. It was far less grand than the carved oak staircase in the main hallway. As she reached the main landing, she saw a room that she'd never really noticed before. The door was ajar, and Isabelle couldn't resist having a look inside. Checking to make sure that no one was about, she gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. Like many of the other rooms in the house, it was dark and gloomy. From the light of one small window at the opposite end of the room, which opened out into an inner courtyard, Isabelle could see that it was full of mannequins and other sewing paraphernalia, rolls of fabric leaning precariously against the wall in the corner near a rail stuffed full of clothes. Several exquisite watercolour sketches of dress designs, like the ones she'd seen in her bedroom, were propped up on the cluttered mantelpiece, alongside china ornaments and a large gold clock. The clock had stopped working a long time ago, its hands permanently frozen at 12:15. An old-fashioned sewing machine perched on a small dusty table near the window, and a sewing box lay open nearby, spilling reels of coloured thread along with several pairs of scissors. This must be Evelyn's dressmaking room. Isabelle took a closer look at some of the sketches on the mantelpiece. Swirls of coloured ink brought to life designs and fashions that were theatrical and opulent. Isabelle remembered Evelyn telling her that she'd been a theatre costume designer, and it was clear that she was extremely talented. Evelyn dressed stylishly even now, and there was something captivating about her French accent. Scarlett had obviously inherited her sense of drama from her mother, Isabelle mused. As Isabelle glanced over the elegant drawings, an old newspaper cutting caught her eye. Man dies in cutthroat motorbike horror mystery, by Star Bulletin reporter Andrew James. A coroner's inquest has concluded an open verdict in the case of a man found dead in a remote wood in Shropshire. Local landowner Mr. Carl Scott Morton found his gardener Tony Anderson, a single father of one, dead on a quad bike at local beauty spot Jacob's Wood. Giving evidence, Mr. Scott Morton said, "I was out for my morning stroll and was horrified to find Tony sitting dead on his bike. I don't think he'd been there all that long, as the bike's engine was still running and I had to turn it off. I could see Tony was beyond help and I didn't want to disturb the scene any further. I immediately walked back to the village and called the police." When the police arrived at the scene, they found Mr. Anderson had died from a laceration to the throat, a jagged wound having severed his jugular vein. Investigating officer Chief Inspector Clare of West Mercia Police said, "The injury appeared to have been caused by Mr. Anderson being in collision with an object, such as a barbed wire fence, as he was riding through the wood. We assume he was trying to get to the village, but lost consciousness before he got there. However, the exact circumstances of the accident are unclear, and some details are troubling." Chief Inspector Clare went on, "Although the cause of death has been confirmed as blood loss, there was very little blood on the body when it was found, and we were unable to find a blood trail through the wood, as we would have expected to. It suggests that someone might have moved the body to the location it was found in order to conceal a possible murder scene. Despite an extensive investigation and appeals for information, no one has ever been arrested in connection with the death. Rumours abound locally about Jacob's Wood, where Mr. Anderson was found. Local woman Veronica Dean told the Star Bulletin, "Jacob's Wood was always one of those places you didn't go. Back in the 1970s, 2 girls went missing from a local school, and there were rumours locally of them being seen there with a mysterious woman in black. Police searched the wood with dogs at the time, but nothing was found." Following the open verdict, the police are appealing to anyone with any information to come forward. Until such time as we have a new line of inquiry, there's not much more we can do. But the public can rest assured that if further information comes to light, it will be thoroughly followed up, said Chief Inspector Clare after the inquest today. Isabelle replaced the newspaper cutting back on the mantelpiece, a puzzled frown on her face. The story matched what Robert had said in the pub the previous night, but none of it made any sense. Isabelle continued to glance around the room. A clothes rail was stuffed full of dresses of varying designs and fabrics. Isabelle walked alongside the rail, touching the material with her hand. As she reached the end of the rail, her eye was caught by 2 items hanging up. They were made of different cloth than the rest of the garments on the rail. They were dark brown and more utilitarian in texture. She took a closer look, and unfolding one of them, she realised they were hooded robes. As she unravelled the robes, something fell on the floor. She leant down and picked up a mask. It was painted dark grey and gold, and had holes where the eyes should be. Isabelle began to feel very uncomfortable. She turned the mask over and pushed it back in the hood and hurriedly returned the robes under the clothes rail. This might have something to do with some play that Evelyn or Scarlett were involved in, but there was a weird vibe in the room. Something just didn't feel right. A sudden creak made her jump. She looked around. Some of the mannequins were covered over with dust sheets. Their moulded shape made them appear strange and ghost-like. Isabelle tensed, and her eyes darted around looking for where the sound had come from. Was she imagining it, or had she seen a slight movement from under the covers of the mannequin in front of her? Her nerves were completely on edge. She approached it slowly and silently. Her heart pounding, she reached out and pulled the cover off. There was nothing there, but a blank marble-like face staring down to one side. Isabelle breathed a sigh of relief and turned to go. It was probably just a gust of air, she decided. The house was full of drafts. She closed the door firmly behind her. The following day, Isabelle had finally removed the cauldron from the ground and was carefully cleaning off the last remnants of the soil and grime when she heard Carl's footsteps in the cellar. "How are you getting on?" "Oh, you are making progress." Isabelle put down her tools and came and stood next to Carl. "Yes, it's out of the ground now, and I've made a preliminary examination of the piece." "Excellent. Is it as I thought, the missing half of the stern cauldron?" Isabelle took a deep breath. She was reasonably sure that this might be the missing half, but didn't want to run the risk of agitating Carl further if, by chance, it wasn't. "Well, I have to say, the prospects are looking good. It all appears to check out." Isabelle paused for a moment, not wanting to commit herself and get Carl's hopes up. "But the only way to know for sure is for me to take it back to the university and match it up against the other piece." Carl's expression darkened. His voice seemed to boom in the confined space of the cellar. "No," he said forcefully. "I can't allow you to do that. It stays here." Isabelle was taken aback at his insistence and wasn't sure how to react. She said quietly, "Well, Mr. Scott-Morton, if you want us to verify the piece—" "No. Possession is 9/10 of the law. If I let you take it away, I may never see it again. You'll keep it in your collection. I know you want it, but others may pay more for it." Isabelle looked at Carl's thunderous expression. She had a horrible feeling that things were getting out of hand. Really, that's not...
If it's so important to match it up with your piece, you can have it sent here. Satisfy yourself it's the real thing, then we can talk money. But until you or someone else pays for it, it doesn't leave this house.
Well, I don't know. This has never happened before. I'll have to ring Professor Edwards, Isabelle said quietly, playing for time while she tried to think of the best course of action. She didn't want to upset Carl or have him complain to the professor about her, especially as it was the first time she'd been given this level of responsibility. Whatever happened, she wanted to keep her job.
Ring whoever you have to, but without a sale, that cauldron stays on this property. Let me know what you decide.
Carl glowered at Isabelle and marched off, leaving Isabelle staring distractedly at the cauldron. There was nothing else she could do. She would need to report back to the professor, and he could make the decision of what would be best.